Every day and every night I pray. I pray for you. I love and I miss you, sister. Come home. Please, God, bring her home.
Emerging from decades of silence, violence against Native American women is becoming more known in America. This song for missing and murdered Indigenous women is composed by Anton George for West Shore Canoe Family to raise awareness of this problem and to facilitate healing. Southern Oregon University Indian Studies professor Brooke Colley describes the issue in a 2019 interview on RVTV Voices.
Today we continue to see this endemic issue in our communities where Native American women, and the statistics actually are quite, I've heard, they're all over the place a little bit, but we always are seen as having the highest rates of violence per capita, so per the population of Native peoples in the United States, and I've heard 1 in 3, 1 in 4, but up to as much as 10 times more than other communities. I think that generally speaking, that violences against Native women are underreported, right? That we don't have good data. And so whatever data we do have still puts us in the highest percentage of violence per population, but it probably is higher than that. And we do know that of those that report and of the data that's collected, the vast majority of perpetrators against Native women are non-Native men, right? So between 85 to 90% of those that are perpetuating this kind of violence are not Native men. So we continue to try to figure out how to protect and provide support and safety for Native women in our communities, both in reservation communities and also in urban places, in cities.
Every day and every night I pray for you. I love and miss you, sister, come home.
The crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous and violence against women cannot be overlooked any longer.
When Secretary Deb Haaland was serving in Congress, she addressed this issue at the State of Indian Nations Conference.
In 2016, it was reported that 8 in 10 Native women had survived serious violence during their lifetimes. 50% have suffered sexual violence, and 90% of these cases have involved a non-Native perpetrator. I appreciate the recent work that tribal governments have done to shed light on the silent crisis of gender violence and violence against our women that have gone overlooked in Indian country for far too long. Most of all, I thank the Native women who have endured generations of systematic violence, who are 10 times more likely to be murdered and 4 times more likely to be sexually assaulted when compared to the national average. Further exacerbating this issue, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights Broken Promises report states that crime and victimization in Indian country is caused by the systematic underfunding of tribal law enforcement and criminal justice systems, coupled with pre-existing barriers. In communities with the nation's highest rates of crime that are comparable to dense urban cities like Detroit and Los Angeles, I'm building on legislation like Savannah's Act and VAWA to provide our women with programmatic resources that will expand to urban areas where many Native Americans are frequently overlooked in this silent crisis. My work will also provide resources to families of missing women.
Tlingit Tribal member Michaela Mitchell sees this situation as a major concern in need of addressing.
This is a huge concern of mine, and it should be a huge concern of everyone else's. The violence and the crimes towards Native American women, especially sexual crimes, are normalized now, and it really shouldn't be. We really have to step back and think why is it this way, and what can we do about it?
In 2019, the Minnesota House of Representatives acted, taking the first step in setting up a task force on missing and murdered Indigenous women. Taking parliamentary steps during session, comments on the enabling legislation were heard.
The reasons that so many missing and murdered Indigenous women's cases go unreported, uninvestigated, and unsolved, but we don't know how many women are actually missing or have been murdered. It is estimated that thousands of Native women have disappeared or been killed, and members, we owe it to our Native community. We owe it to this nation to recognize and address this historic trauma. So this bill, House File 70, is the very first step in understanding the significance of our missing and murdered Indigenous communities and bringing an end to this really, really, really horrific violence. It creates a task force to address the violence against Indigenous women, and it defines the standards and requirements of that task force. This task force will be responsible for examining and reporting ways to address the systematic causes behind the violence against Indigenous women. It appropriates methods for tracking and collecting data. It examines government policies and institutions that impact violence against Indigenous women. And it's going to recommend appropriate measures to address the violence and assist the victims and their 11 families. It will also include victims, survivors, Indian community members, and also those that have worked hard with eradicating this violence against women. It will also include membership from all 11 tribes. So we're trying to make the invisible visible. We don't want any more Native American families to worry and wonder if their loved ones will return home when they walk out the door. So members, I'm asking you to be problem solvers. I'm asking you to join me, and I know many of you had. I'm asking you to vote green.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 128 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.
On a national level, the Violence Against Women Act suffered a rollback during the Trump administration.
VAWA is very important. It took 25 years to get where it is right now. In 2013, an amendment was made to it to ensure more rights and safeties for Indigenous women, for our Native American communities, for immigrant communities, and for LGBTQ communities, because we face higher rates of violence. The Violence Against Women Act is an absolute necessity for all women in this country, but like I said, it's important that we single out some populations that are targeted. And what's disturbing to me, what's upsetting to me, is right now it's still waiting to be reinstated like it is every year. It's still waiting on a budget, and it's still sitting on the table. And that's not okay. The Violence Against Women Act should always be in place. There should never be any nail biting or whether or not there's going to be funding for these programs again the next year. And Trump quietly, this past April, rolled back the definition of what domestic violence is. It took us a very long time to move away from the judicial definition of domestic violence towards the much more comprehensive view of what domestic violence means, talking about emotional abuse and verbal abuse and so much more. It was a very long, comprehensive list of what that is, and it took years to get there. And as of April, it was rolled back to just one sentence. And so the Violence Against Women Act provides funding for Indigenous communities so that they can continue to educate and work with people, with victims of all sorts of crimes, sexual assault, rape, domestic violence. And it's a much needed act that is used to help keep our people safe.
Safety, a major issue for Indigenous women. And how about you?
This is a funny little story. We were out, I think we were at Walmart or something just the other day, me and my boyfriend, and I always lock my doors, and he's like, why do you always lock your doors? I was just like, you never know what could happen. And then I started explaining to him why I'm such a paranoid person. Like, for example, I've had an aunt missing before I was born, and I'm 20 years old now, and nothing's ever been done about it. Sometimes when I'm scrolling through social media, I'll see a flyer of her, but it's only shared by other Native networks. And it's just, I've had other families members that were females been murdered, some missing, just like I mentioned the lady before, and nothing's ever been done about it, truly.
So this really touches home on a number of levels.
Yeah, so I think it kind of works with my paranoia, I guess. I'm just a really paranoid person on stuff like that. And I think it's affected me long term.
It sounds like a rational fear to me, considering.
So, and then I remember my grandparents being like, oh yeah, always pick the right partner, because just stuff's happened.
From hearing these stories, it sounds like without some kind of change, the status quo makes it easy for the perpetrators to get by with these kinds of things.
Yeah, some of it has to do with jurisdiction, right? So on our reservation, sometimes people have referred to those places as jurisdictional no man's land, right? Where people can come onto them and sort of act in violent ways, perpetuate certain kinds of crimes and get away with it because there weren't always policing that was effective, right? Now we see more sharing between state and tribal jurisdictions working together, trying to solve some of these issues. But if you have folks who fundamentally don't see Native women as being as valuable, right? They've been devalued over the course of many generations.
Alongside the Klamath River, near the side of a road, there's a weather-beaten flyer. On it, the face of an Indigenous woman, 33-year-old Emily Risling. She's been missing for more than a year.
I think the most heartbreaking thing is that you just may never see that person's face again.
She had everything going for her in the right direction, and the things started falling apart.
Emily's parents, Gary and Judy, are heartbroken. Their daughter vanished into thin air. Her case is growing cold.
It's really simple. We want to know what happened, where she is.
What we do know,
Hi!
As a child, Emily was a ray of light, full of joy, so much love, so much potential.
Hey.
From an early age, she embraced her Native identity.
She loved her culture. She loved her family.
The straight-A student had lots of friends and went to college on a scholarship. Then her world began to crumble. A boyfriend violently abused her. She began to use drugs.
And so this young woman who was so bright, so capable, so, the world was her oyster, she kind of became a different person.
Her parents told me after the birth of her second child, Emily developed postpartum psychosis. She was arrested for igniting a fire in a cemetery and put in jail. Her parents hoped she would finally be forced into treatment.
The DA's office, her family, all were against letting her out, and they did.
A few days later, everything changed.
So give us some perspective of where we are.
So we're on 169 at Pequon Bridge, and this bridge is the last confirmed place that we know Emily was at.
Greg O'Rourke is police chief of the Yurok tribe. The bridge is on Yurok land, more than 2 hours from Emily's home. He believes she got here by hitchhiking.
Here on the bridge is where we can confirm multiple witnesses.
But if a major crime involving Emily occurred here or anywhere else on tribal lands in California, the tribe has no jurisdiction to investigate it. So who's in charge when someone is murdered or goes missing on tribal land? The answer to that involves a dark chapter in federal Indian policy. It's known as Public Law 280.
So it's taken away a tribe's ability, or at least in theory, their sovereignty to be able to have their own people, have their own law enforcement, and investigate crimes on the reservation and put that onto the state.
Congress passed the law in 1953 without the consent of tribes. It greatly enlarged the power of certain states, including California, to handle major crimes on Indian reservations, but with no additional funding.
The sheriff's office has jurisdiction on tribal land. And so you're having government come in and telling a sovereign nation of what crimes that we're going to enforce on their land. This is our booking area.
William Hansel is sheriff of Humboldt County. He sees this law as a roadblock to solving cases.
When there's no trust involved, oftentimes we can't even get our foot in the door to have an interview.
That said, Emily's family is angry. They feel law enforcement has given up.
You guys have been accused of not doing enough, and you've got the money, you've got the resources. Where are you when it comes to these cases?
Yeah. So I think a lot of things have changed over the years, because a lot of times I think where there was jurisdictional boundaries, a lot of times there was finger pointing. Who's going to investigate this? Who's going to follow up with this?
Both the sheriff and local tribes are dealing with the lack of money and manpower in a county the size of Connecticut that's home to 11 tribes. It's also way off the grid.
It's an extremely remote area. You know, when people talk about rural, then there's us.
The Yurok Reservation itself is 85 square miles. Easy to see how Emily could just disappear.
I think the system failed Emily all along.
All Judy and Gary have left are memories, birthdays, holidays, and her smiling face. Emily's son, their grandson David, wants to know.
Can you take me, Grandpa, to go down and look for my mom? And if we can find her, we'll find her. And he looks at me and he goes, well, what happens if we can't find her? I said, David, we just keep looking.
People are going missing, kids are going missing, women are going missing. It doesn't matter who they are or what their race is or anything. It shouldn't matter, especially in Canada, but you know, there's a lot of people who would tell you it does.
Around 2002, that the Highway of Tears started being talked about a lot more publicly, and started learning about this other place in the province where, once again, women were going missing and being murdered. Most of the cases are unsolved, and once again, most of those women were Indigenous.
The highest number of unsolved cases. 18 of those are the responsibility of an RCMP investigative group called EPANA. It was created to investigate the unsolved cases along the Highway of Tears. Their area has since expanded. EPANA has had their funding cut multiple times over the last few years. We don't know what's left of the task force, but they are meant to be actively working on these cases. Claudia Williams' sister, Alberta, was murdered in Prince Rupert in 1989. Police have not made any arrests and have no leads. Ray has been working on her case for 5 years.
Alberta and I were working in a cannery to make some quick money. And our last payday, we went to Bogey's Cabaret. There was a bunch of her friends, kind of a different age group, so I didn't really want to sit down. So I just went, I mingled around. I walked back, checked on the table, seen Alberta laughing her head off. Just, they were having fun. And Alberta said, Claudia, come on, we're going to a party. My boyfriend at the time, he distracted me and I looked that way. Then I turned around, and Alberta was gone. Gone. So was a group of people. It was like something just came and lifted them from that corner. That's how fast it was. My heart started pounding. It's like I knew right away that'd be the last time I saw her.
Do you know if she ever made it to that party?
Well, the police are not giving me any answers about that. Like I sit there and I go, well, you know, Alberta was sitting there, you know, and so was sitting there, so-and-so was sitting there. You know, I try to think, I'm going, oh, am I missing anybody? Constantly investigating in my own mind.
So this goes through your mind every day?
A lot of it is guilt. If I didn't turn away for a second, I probably would have went with my sister to that party and she would be alive.
Do you think you know who did this?
I'm pretty positive I know who did it. Still an open investigation. That's why it makes it so hard. You feel helpless.
Every day and every night I pray for you. I love and miss you.
Native Americans struggle with the same problem in Montana.
Native Americans make up 6.7% of Montana's population, but account for 26% of missing person reports. And while local officials claim that causes for these deaths and disappearances are varied, from drug trafficking to domestic violence, the one thing they all have in common is that they take place in a jurisdictional minefield. Depending on where someone is reported missing or where a victim is found, it could fall to either state, federal, or tribal authorities to investigate. And with that many intersecting agencies, there are plenty of cracks for these cases to fall through.
An Indian reservation, for all intents and purposes, is a sovereign nation. It is subject to completely different laws, governing bodies. They're like a country within a country. So a Bighorn County deputy can show up on a tribal member's doorstep on the reservation, and that tribal member can say, you have no right to be here, you have no jurisdiction here. It can be very difficult.
Responsibility might fall with the county sheriff's department, officers from the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs, or the tribal police. Sometimes the FBI also steps in. There are both too many agencies jockeying for authority and not enough resources to go around. In late 2019, the Crow tribe declared a state of emergency. Tribal Chairman AJ Not Afraid cited a list of issues, including the BIA's lack of officers and failure to address the murdered and missing women crisis. The Crow Reservation is roughly the size of Connecticut, but for years has only had 5 BIA officers. Recently, the tribe assembled its own sovereign police force, independent from the BIA.
We're between two communities right now. We currently have no radio service. We have no cell phone service. We have no ways, unless we had a sat phone, we wouldn't have any way to communicate with anybody. And that contributes. It's very wide open. It's very desolate out here. The I-90 corridor, anybody that's going to Denver, going to South Dakota, trying to get to the West Coast, it all travels right through here for the most part. So we get a lot of drug trafficking out on the interstate, and you know, with the crime, the drugs, the domestic violence, it's all a perfect breeding ground for people to go missing.
Here in Oregon, this issue has been discussed a lot recently, and Tana Sanchez, who's a House representative for the Oregon legislature, recently proposed a bill, House Bill 2625, which would ask the state of Oregon Department of the police department to do a better job at collecting data, because right now we don't have very good data in Oregon about what kind of issue this is here.
And resources often follow data, don't they?
Right, and we in our communities we can say, yes, we experience incredible violence, and we can sort of look at different vignettes and say, like, we think that there's a high number of violence against Native American women, and that we are worried about women who've been murdered and not having those cases taken seriously, or they've disappeared and folks aren't looking for them, despite the fact that these aren't nameless people, that they're connected to communities and people who love them. But we don't really have good data to help drive that conversation forward and to create the kinds of resources or to figure out where things need to be addressed. And so this bill is meant to do just that, to require the Oregon State Police to collect better data and then to report on it.
And how about you?
I mean, this bill hits close to home. I mean, there's people in my community down on the York Reservation who are missing currently. The word was put out a few days ago that, you know, they're missing, and violence against, like, I've seen, like, violence against Native women, and it sucks. I've had violence perpetuated against me, and it's something that, like, we're always told that women are sacred because we're life bringers. Like, we carry life within us, and just the way, like, things are perpetuated against women, it's really hard, and it makes one think, like, why is this deemed okay? Like, and it comes back to, like, if you think about it, Native women are othered. And so, like, there's this othering that goes against Native peoples, and then people are like, well, it's just a Native woman, it's whatever. And then unfortunately you see a lot of it stem over into the law enforcement agencies. They're like, oh, it's another Indian, probably got drunk and got lost or whatever. And so there's a lot of, like, issues with the discrimination, and then systemic racism. And so you just see stuff like that, and it, like Michaela said, it's normalized, and it shouldn't be.
It may be surprising to hear that in Oregon, law enforcement at the state level is working with tribes now. Brooke Colley is hopeful that this collaboration will have an impact on this deeply rooted problem.
And it's actually a wonderful partnership. I mean, we were just up in Salem. I went with 4 of my students from Southern Oregon University, and we went to see the governor sign the bill into law, which was really exciting. And I think everybody who went was really inspired, and it was an emotional thing to see happen. But we could see that that there was a agreement between the state police and some of the tribal leaders, really, to do a better job at being in community with one another. The police chief got up and he said that he would treat, like, our community, the women in our community, like his own sisters and his own daughters, which I thought was a really powerful statement. And so I hope I have a lot of hope that we're going to be able to get better data and understand this issue here in our state in the next few years. There's a long-term history of distrust and difficult communication between law enforcement and Native communities, and it's complicated. Right?
That's a lot of things, yeah.
But with the commitment of those that see this as an issue of importance, right, and through collaboration between the law enforcement and the tribes, I think that there's good potential that we're going to be able to get better data and actually do something about this issue here.
Colley says that data is critical to addressing the issue of violence against Native American women.
We need data so that people can because we can tell them story after story after story. But you need, a lot of times, the way that which the government functions and the way in which systems function is they need to have certain data to take seriously and understand how to allocate resources. And so I can tell you that I don't know, I won't speak of my students who are here, but of my community and of my family, I don't know any Native woman who has been saved from this kind of violence, either been harassed or experienced rape or domestic violence.
Beyond the law enforcement issues, Kali sees connecting Native American girls to their culture is also crucial to ending the scourge of missing Native American women.
It's difficult to figure out exactly what to do, but a lot of it has to do with us being able to give our girls strength, right, and deeply connected to their culture so that they have that self-esteem and know their value and know that they are important, right, and they are loved.
House Bill 2625 passed the Oregon legislature in 2019 and was signed into law, joining a state and federal effort to confront violence against Native American women.